Well, good morning. Thank you very much for all turning out. So I'm here to talk to you about open source foundations. Now, what do I mean by open source foundations? I'm talking about the organizations that exist around an open source project to get them started. You might have seen quite a lot of them getting started recently. There's one for Node, there seems to be one every few minutes coming out of the Linux Foundation. They're happening all the time, and I've got to say, really, no more foundations already, people. We have enough. I want to say it to you straight, please stop your employers from starting new open source trade associations. We have enough of them. I looked for a comprehensive list, and I found that every website I visited was out of date because there had been too many new foundations created since the list was authored. There are many, many, many of them. Now, we have enough of them already. Well, apart from the one or two more that we still need. Let's have a little look at why it is that everyone thinks they need one. My subject for the next 10 minutes is what foundations can and cannot guarantee, and I want to particularly focus on the importance of securing software freedom for developers and users, rather than on the need to have a corporate vehicle. The key roles of open source foundations are to create a safe environment for an open source project to exist. Primarily an asset lock. An asset lock is a guarantee that the money and the trademarks and the copyrights and so on are only going to be used for the benefit of the community. An open source project's foundation can be a bank to collect money, to look after donations, to spend them wisely and equally. It can be a guarantor of equality, making sure that the organization is led by representatives rather than by delegates from sponsors. And it can be an infrastructure provider, making sure that the project has got a Git instance, for example. An open source community is what happens when a whole load of people with a self-interest related to a piece of open source software gather around a source code commons. And when that happens, they need to be sure that the self-interests of the other participants don't get in the way of their self-interests. Watching the flow of self-interest is the key aspect of an open source community and of an open source foundation. And really, rather than the governance, the most important aspect of an open source community is the license that it is under. Now, you'd expect me to say this, having been involved in OSI for quite a long time, but the most important guarantor of the freedoms that are necessary to allow a group of collaborators to safely nurture an open source project into existence is an OSI-approved open source license. Now, just in case you need to hear the immediate past president of OSI say it to you, open source and free software are the same thing. And if you want to have an argument about how different they are, you're wrong. They're the same thing, okay? Open source licenses are there to guarantee that the software is free software. They guarantee your software freedom. They guarantee that you have the freedom to use the software for any purpose, to study the software, to improve the software so it better meets your needs or the needs of the people you serve, and to share the original or the derived software with anyone that you wish. That's the fundamental, and that's the thing that really matters in an open source project. I get really nervous when I find that I can't see the details of the license or indeed the source code when I visit some open source foundation's website. Eben Moglen has said in the past that licenses are the constitutions for communities, and the most important aspect of your governance is your open source license. I'd go further than that, and I'd suggest that an OSI-approved license with a reciprocal element, yes, a copyleft license, is probably the thing that most open source projects need to best express their cohesiveness, their intent to develop together. It doesn't have to be the GPL. Sorry, Bradley. If you want to hear the GPL promoted, Bradley Kuhn is on later. Could be the Mozilla Public License. That's my favorite. But I think a copyleft license is generally a good thing. The reason for that is because once corporations get involved, you need to be protected from each other as well as having your freedoms guaranteed. A friend of mine, Brian Cantrell, pointed out that corporations are like lawnmowers. A corporation, you may think it loves you, but one day you're going to go up to it and it's going to bite you. Or rather, it's like a lawnmower. It's going to cut your hand off when you put your hand in. And that's not because it either loves you or hates you. It's because, well, think of a lawnmower. If you put your hand in it, it cuts your hand off because it's a lawnmower. Corporations, when they get involved in open source projects, tend to turn into bad actors unless there is something to stop them from doing so. And so that's why you need a strong open source license, and ultimately, that's why you need to have an association around a project to impose rules beyond the open source license. Now, keep in mind that an organization that's been started to keep control and to keep the peace between enterprises is actually a trade association. And we've got to distinguish between trade associations and not-for-profit public benefit organizations. They're very different things. So OSI is a public benefit organization. Our mission says that we exist to serve the general public. We don't exist to serve our members or our stakeholders. We exist to serve the general public. And open source organizations that exist to serve the general public are different from open source organizations that exist only to serve their members. That's not to say such organizations are necessarily bad, but what it does mean is that such organizations are very well understood by the corporations that participate in them. Trade associations are like standards bodies. They can eventually suffer regulatory capture. Back in the 1970s and 80s, I used to work on open standards with another OSI that was working on a 7-layer model. And I used to do all sorts of exciting things with X-rated standards. The reason we had standards was to break the corporate lock-in of the software and hardware monopolists. Standards were there as a tool to stop you from getting locked in, to stop you from being manipulated by your suppliers. But as time went by, those suppliers got to understand what was going on better and better, hired very capable professionals who knew how to game the system, and turned the open standard system into something that served them instead of serving their market. And the truth is that when you create any system of rules, by implication, you've also defined the game that will play it. And the bigger the system of rules, the more games. If you create a bigger attack surface, you can expect to have either a more entertaining attack or more less entertaining attacks. And so that's what happened to standards bodies. Lots of rules, lots of games. It ended up in something that I thought was quite remarkable happening in a city in Scandinavia a few years back when Microsoft tried to introduce OXML into ISO. There was actually a street demonstration of geeks campaigning for the integrity of ISO. It was a remarkable thing. So a big foundation today is an ideal playing surface for the skilled existing game of standards politics. One of the strong reasons why I beg you not to create more trade association-style foundations is we don't need more of those games. Playing those games is desperately expensive. If you're a startup, you really can't afford to hire a bunch of, well, older standards professionals to go and attend meetings in Tokyo, to go and work out how to let you stay in business in the standards environment that you're working in. Now, that's not to say that trade association-style foundations don't have good sides. The most important thing they do is they separate roles and responsibilities for a project. They play the role, as it were, of the B arc. If you've read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, you'll know that the planet Golga Frincham solved a problem that it had with vice presidents and marketing executives and strategists by putting them all on a B arc and sending them into space in advance of the rest of the population. And a well-structured open source foundation is a B arc that lets the developers get on with developing while all the strategists can get on with strategizing in an expensive room somewhere. You should never underestimate the value of a B arc. I've seen it be crucial to the success of an open source community fairly recently. More seriously, there are some green flags for identifying good foundations. A good foundation will have a separation of responsibilities. It won't let the people with fiduciary responsibility have technical control. It'll keep those two things separate and have an engineering steering committee as well as a board of directors. It will have a public benefit mission rather than a mission that serves only the members of the organization. It will have a strong, trusted OSI-approved license that represents the opinions of the participants. It will have an asset lock, and it will have representative governance to make sure that it is the people who are participating who get to decide what happens next, and in particular, that will time out and take off the votes of the people who are no longer participating but were once great. I've seen many projects suffering from having the more mature members of the organization voting down the innovative new activities that they're trying to have. So the problem that I'm describing is actually not so much a problem with trade association-style foundations. It's a problem between confusing liberty and commerce. When you confuse liberty and commerce, then it's easy to get lost in the design of your open source organization. Perhaps we need to stop saying foundation altogether. Perhaps we need to have some new way of letting organizations identify themselves. Maybe have organizations describe themselves as community interest or industry interest organizations so that we can tell them apart. This is not to say that all public benefit organizations end up being good. Over time, even the most beautiful organizations can run into problems and gather a bit of detritus around them. Probably the best organization that I've seen in the open source foundation space, a public benefit corporation, is the Apache Software Foundation. And even Apache is susceptible to the gaming of its rules and has a small but significant number of projects that are the victims of corporate gaming. More than that, you can never be sure what's going to happen next. You create some great system of rules, and then further down the road, someone comes in and takes over and uses them for bad intent. That can really make things go seriously wrong when the wrong hands take control of controls that you thought were good controls. Just look at Java to see the truth of that. So if you are going to start a new activity, I beg you to join an existing organization if you possibly can, an existing proven organization. There's a few listed on the screen, but there are many, many alternatives, and I'd suggest that you're going to need to get advice. And I'd suggest that you get advice not just from lawyers, but also from people who are experienced and skilled in creating communities and foundations. There's a checklist up there for you of the things that you need to do. Most importantly, you need to incorporate wisely. Remember that incorporating doesn't solve anything. Creating a new legal entity simply fossilizes or crystallizes the consensus and the consent of your community. And you don't make anything succeed by jumping straight to a new legal structure. Make sure you've got all the players in the room and agree everything first. And do pick a good jurisdiction. Why is it that all the foundations are getting started in America? I seriously think we need something like Software Freedom Conservancy here in Europe as well. And I'd quite like to start one. I don't know if anyone else would like to. I'll be doing office hours at lunchtime. And if you would like to talk about that, or indeed any of the other things that I've said here, feel free. In the end, if all else fails, make sure that you're creating more software freedom for more people. Communities have a way of absorbing and overcoming harm. What does not kill us makes us stronger. But when all's said and done, enough foundations already. We have enough of them. Thank you very much.